I'm Christopher, and this is Animal Attacks. Today, we're looking at a case where a massive great white encounter pulls a 357-pound surfer into something he can't escape. From crowded reef surf hiding what's underneath, to a Fort Pierce Marina dock where a dropped phone turns a split-second decision into a fight for survival. Let's begin with the first story, where a 357-pound surfer is sitting off South Africa's remote wild coast, seconds away from everything going wrong. It was March 9th, 2014, at a remote reef break known locally as Drift Rock Point along South Africa's southern coastline. The nearest town lay several miles away, and access required travel down a narrow coastal road that ended above rocky cliffs and tidal channels. A small regional surf event was underway near the mouth of a tidal river, where murky estuarine water mixed with the open Indian Ocean. Varick Dunn, 38, was a heavily built man weighing approximately 357 pounds. He worked long shifts at a regional freight depot in a nearby coastal city, maintaining vehicles and handling heavy industrial loads. Surfing was not his primary sport, but in recent years he had taken it up recreationally as a personal challenge. He entered the competition after paying a modest entry fee, treating it as an unusual break from routine rather than a competitive pursuit. His longboard was reinforced and visibly worn, with personal markings near the leash plug from years of use. The kind of board that tells more about persistence than style. The event proceeded with limited in-water safety coverage, relying primarily on shore observation and a small number of support personnel. Conditions included choppy surf, shifting currents near the reef edge, and reduced visibility in the water column due to sediment and wave agitation. Temperatures remained mild, influenced by intermittent coastal upwelling that brought cooler water into the surf zone. Varick paddled out in the early afternoon and joined the rest of the lineup near the outer reef. He stayed low on his board, legs hanging in the water, shifting every so often with a few small paddles as the current moved him around. People kept drifting and trading spots between sets, and before long he'd edged a bit away from the main group without really noticing. Beneath him, a large, great white shark moved through deeper water along the reef edge, following natural movement corridors where bait fish concentrations shifted with current flow. The shark rose from depth towards surface activity associated with the surf lineup, responding to vibration, splashing, and movement above. Great whites along South Africa's southern coastline often move along reef edges and current lines where bait fish gather, especially near river mouths where visibility drops from sediment mixing into the surf. In conditions like that, surfers sitting low on boards can create silhouettes and surface vibration patterns that great whites investigate from below before briefly surfacing and turning away again. Witnesses later described a sudden explosion of water beneath the surfer before he was thrown from the board. The shark appeared only briefly at the surface, before disappearing again beneath the turbulence. The impact caused immediate chaos in the lineup. Nearby surfers moved away quickly, paddling towards safer spacing as the water surface became heavily disturbed. The shark remained in the vicinity for a short period, moving just below the surface and reacting to continued movement and turbulence in the water column, before gradually withdrawing into deeper water along the reef edge. Even in chaos, the water can go quiet again faster than people expect. A rescue craft was launched within minutes of the incident, but visibility had already been compromised by churned water, floating debris, and dispersing surf activity. Responders reached the general area shortly afterward, though the immediate impact zone had shifted slightly due to current movement and drifting equipment. Search operations began with event safety personnel and assisting support craft. Varick Dunn was later found downstream from where it happened. His board and gear were separated and partly submerged along the reef line, carried there by the current. Medical assessment confirmed fatal traumatic injuries consistent with a large, great white shark attack, with death occurring rapidly due to catastrophic hemorrhage and severe soft tissue trauma. No prolonged survival window was indicated based on field evaluation. In the aftermath, the Regional Surfing Association suspended competition events at the location pending review of safety procedures and environmental conditions. A brief local report documented the fatal incident during competition conditions, noting the presence of a large predatory shark in the surf zone. The case was later recorded in marine incident databases as a confirmed great white shark encounter, resulting in a fatality involving a 357-pound surfer in a competitive lineup environment. Over time, the incident remained referenced within the local surfing community as an example of how rapidly conditions in dynamic reef systems can change, particularly in regions where river outflow, reef structure, and open ocean predators overlap in close proximity. What stuck with people afterward was how ordinary everything looked right before it happened. But what happens next moves away from the surf entirely, because what starts as a simple moment on a dock turns into a decision that escalates in seconds. It was July 18th, 2016, on a quiet stretch of the St. Johns River system near its lower tidal reaches in Florida, where freshwater mixes with brackish water and visibility drops in the summer heat. Braylon Sipe, 19, had recently completed his GED after multiple attempts and worked at a tire shop outside Sanford, doing routine mechanical labor in heavy summer conditions. With him were his cousin Davin, 21, and co-workers Jeshua, 20, and Mech, 18, all tubing through a slow-moving stretch of river that eventually feeds into larger tidal water. Just a group of young guys treating the river like it was harmless, the way people often do in places they've known too long. A weathered sign at the river access point warned about alligators and wildlife in the water. The group noticed it briefly, then kept moving downstream as the trees thickened overhead and the light faded under the canopy. The water temperature remained warm at the surface, but cooler currents moved beneath, and visibility dropped to near zero beyond arm's length. Braylon trailed his hands in the water from the back of his flotation tube. Within a deeper, darker bend of the river system where the channel dropped and visibility collapsed, a large bull shark moved along the edge of the current flow. It rose quickly from below in a sudden strike toward the trailing swimmer. Bull sharks are one of the few large shark species capable of moving deep into freshwater and brackish river systems for extended periods. In warm tidal rivers with low visibility, they often follow deeper channel edges where fish movement concentrates with the current, especially during summer months when water temperatures stay elevated. The contact was immediate and forceful, causing a severe traumatic injury to the upper arm and shoulder region. The water around the group turned turbulent as the shark released. It remained briefly in the area beneath the surface before moving off into deeper water along the channel edge. There's a kind of speed to it that doesn't register properly until it's already over. The others froze for a second, confused about what they were even seeing, then scrambled toward the nearest muddy bank while trying to help the injured swimmer at the same time. Blood spread quickly through the moving water, clouding the area around them for a moment. Once they made it to shore, one of them called emergency services, though they struggled at first to explain exactly where they were because of the winding river and thick vegetation. A rescue response team arrived from a regional fire and medical service unit and began searching the stretch of river by boat. A helicopter from a nearby trauma center was dispatched in parallel to assist with aerial search coordination and expedite medical evacuation once the victim was located. The injured swimmer was airlifted to a hospital in a nearby city where surgeons worked to address severe traumatic injury to the upper limb with near-complete amputation at the upper arm and major vascular loss. He was pronounced dead at the hospital following emergency treatment efforts. The arm was not recovered. Authorities noted the incident occurred in a tidal section of the river where larger predatory fish can occasionally move in from connected waterways. Places like this don't really become dangerous all at once. They stay the same, and then, suddenly they aren't. Local media briefly reported the incident in a short article, but coverage remained limited and did not spread beyond the region. The river access point remained open with existing warning signage, and no additional safety infrastructure was added following review. In the months that followed, those who had been with him on the water spoke about the incident rarely and without embellishment. Davin, Jeshua, and Mech returned to work and routine, the way people do when there is nothing else available to them. The tire shop filled his position within the month. No further changes were made to river safety policy, and the location continued to be used for casual recreation under the same posted warnings and general conditions as before. This accident could have been prevented by keeping people out of low visibility tidal stretches where they have no control over where they drift. That idea doesn't really reset here. Instead, it carries straight into the next case, where a relaxed river float turns into something far more serious than anyone expected. It was August 4th, 2015, 1.2 nautical miles southeast of Marathon, Florida. The water was flat under a clear sky with no other vessels visible in any direction. Celeste Grabsky, 41, worked at the front desk of a dental practice in a coastal suburb of South Florida, handling scheduling, billing, and non-stop patient calls. She kept her hair tied back during work and wore it loose on weekends, and had spent years asking her husband to take a proper anniversary trip away from their routine life. Tomek Grabsky, 44, a warehouse supervisor and licensed boat operator, had rented a mid-sized offshore vessel for their anniversary trip and stopped at a marina beforehand to purchase a large bucket of mixed fish scraps intended for attracting marine life. He later told investigators he had not clearly planned how it would be used. He had consumed alcohol during the outing, which affected judgment and coordination. The vessel was anchored above deep Atlantic waters where large predatory sharks, including tiger sharks, are documented throughout the region. The swim platform at the stern sat just above the waterline, a common recreational space where passengers often sit with their feet in the sea. A posted advisory at the marina warned against attracting wildlife near swimmers or anchored vessels, particularly through the use of bait or fish waste. Tiger sharks are highly opportunistic feeders and are known to investigate sudden food signals quickly, especially in offshore waters where fish waste spreads through the current. Even small amounts of blood, oil, or discarded bait can draw predatory fish closer to anchored boats than people realize. Celeste was sitting on the back platform in the afternoon with her feet in the water, reading. She had already gone in and out of the water earlier in the trip. Tomek picked up the bucket of fish scraps, carried it to the side, and dumped it straight into the water next to her. The water around the stern turned cloudy with fish bits, oil, and blood as it spread quickly with the current. She immediately shouted at him, but by then it was already in the water and spreading out. In that moment, what was just a careless pour was already turning the water beside her into something entirely different. Within seconds, movement intensified beside the platform. A large shark rose quickly from below and struck toward the disturbance near the stern. There was a sudden burst of water and chaos at the surface as Celeste lost her footing and went into the water. Tomek moved toward the stern, but did not enter the water. He attempted to throw flotation equipment, which fell short of the target area. There was continued turbulence in the water near the stern, with brief, unclear movement at the surface. Celeste briefly resurfaced before disappearing again beneath the disturbance. A distress call was transmitted from the vessel requesting emergency assistance. A maritime rescue unit launched from a nearby station and proceeded to the reported coordinates, but visibility and surface conditions had already deteriorated. A search operation was initiated, including diver deployment, but no significant remains were recovered despite extended efforts. State wildlife officials and county police looked into what happened and said it took place in an area known for sharks, and that the fish waste dumped into the water near where she was swimming likely played a role. No one was charged, though they did review whether anyone was negligent. In the end, they said it was unsafe behavior, but not enough to bring criminal charges. One item of personal footwear was later recovered, drifting several hundred feet from the anchor point. No significant remains were found despite extended search efforts. The case was officially closed after several weeks. Even with boats circling the exact coordinates, the water had already erased anything clear enough to follow. A regional newspaper published a brief account of the incident, noting the loss of a woman at sea following a shark encounter. Major outlets did not pursue follow-up coverage, and the story remained confined to local reporting. Years later, the incident was still referenced locally as a reminder of how quickly routine decisions on open water could escalate beyond recovery without warning signals. I think the responsibility here mostly comes down to introducing fish waste into the water while someone is still swimming nearby. And then it shifts again, this time out on open water, where what should have been a quiet anniversary trip starts falling apart in ways that can't be undone. It was January 14th, 2017, in open Atlantic waters approximately 120 nautical miles northeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. A cruise vessel moved through deep offshore ocean under a moonless sky and calm sea conditions. Denzel Fripp, 52, worked as a regional sales manager for a commercial flooring company in the Midwestern United States, traveling frequently between clients, warehouses, and hotels. He was divorced, lived alone, and had 2 adult children with limited contact. People who worked with him said he often looked tired, drank a lot while traveling for work, and kept to himself for long stretches between jobs. He later booked a solo Caribbean cruise for a short break, only mentioning it to a few people and not really sharing any details about where he was going or what he planned to do. The vessel carried thousands of passengers and operated normal nighttime services, including dining, entertainment, and open deck access. That evening, Denzel moved through onboard bars and lounges before stepping out onto the aft exterior promenade. He was later seen alone near the stern railing, watching the ship's wake stretch into darkness. From the deck, it just looks like someone killing time alone at the rail. A passing couple briefly noticed him near the railing, but did not alert the crew. He went over the stern railing into the open ocean while the ship was still underway and quickly increased distance from the vessel. He resurfaced afterward, though his condition at that point could not be clearly determined, and he had no flotation device or visual reference to the ship. The man overboard alarm was not activated immediately and was only raised several minutes later after confirmation. Once alerted, the vessel initiated emergency procedures and began a wide turning maneuver to return toward the last known position. In the meantime, Denzel remained in open water, drifting in a deep ocean environment with no land nearby and no external reference points beyond fading ship lights. In the minutes that followed, movement was detected in the water around the area of the fall, with brief surface disturbances consistent with an oceanic white-tip shark, a species known to range widely in offshore Atlantic waters. The animal remained in the vicinity briefly before moving out of the immediate area. At that point, heavy blood loss, exhaustion, and not being able to stay above the water made it harder and harder to survive. Several minutes after the man overboard alert was raised, the vessel began turning, and searchlights eventually reached the area. The beam illuminated scattered surface disturbance, but the individual was no longer clearly visible at the surface. From the deck, the light just shows how much open water there is, with nothing holding still inside it. Crew members observed from the deck, but did not provide detailed public descriptions beyond noting severe conditions in the water. A rescue tender launched from the ship and reached the position shortly after the vessel returned, operating in darkness and residual wake. Recovery efforts began immediately, but the victim was already deceased upon retrieval. A shipboard medical officer confirmed death shortly afterward, citing catastrophic blood loss and traumatic injuries consistent with multiple severe limb wounds in open ocean conditions. A formal maritime review listed contributing factors including intoxication, fall from vessel, and delayed detection due to distance. Marine predator involvement, consistent with an oceanic white-tip shark, was noted in post-incident analysis, but was not emphasized in public reporting. The behavior was interpreted as an opportunistic investigation of a drifting casualty in offshore waters, rather than a prolonged predatory sequence. A regional Coast Guard report released weeks later added further detail on timing and offshore conditions, but saw limited media circulation. A short obituary appeared in his hometown newspaper noting his death during travel, without reference to circumstances at sea. The cruise line attributed the death to an accidental overboard fall. No mention of marine animal involvement was included in public statements, and the case remained primarily within maritime safety records. In open water like this, once someone is separated from the vessel, even a few minutes of delay can turn recovery into a search with no clear starting point. But the next case brings it back closer to shore, where something as ordinary as a phone and a shallow marina becomes the trigger for everything that follows. It was June 7th, 2014, at the Fort Pierce City Marina on the Indian River Lagoon in Florida. Dock lights were on at dusk as 4 men rested after a full day offshore on the water. Otis Galt, 33, had lived his entire life in Fort Pierce and worked as a dock hand and occasional crew for a small charter operating out of the same marina. He knew the water well, including its shifting currents, shallow basin behavior, and known risks, and often mentioned those conditions to clients as part of his work. That evening, he was with 3 friends and co-workers connected to boating and marine service jobs in the same area, gathered casually on the dock with no further plans. The Indian River Lagoon is a shallow coastal estuary and a well-documented bull shark nursery habitat in North America, where sharks regularly enter marina basins at dusk to follow bait fish. At the time, dock lighting made the water below clearly visible in about 5 to 6 feet of depth. He was talking with the others when his phone slipped out of his hand and dropped into the water beside the dock. It didn't disappear into the dark. It just sat there on the sandy bottom, glowing under the dock lights like it was no big deal. At first, nobody really panicked. It felt like something simple, something someone could just reach down and grab in a few seconds without thinking much about it. Bull sharks regularly move through shallow marina basins and estuary systems at dusk because dock lights attract bait fish into concentrated pockets near pilings and seawalls. In warm coastal lagoons, even water that appears shallow and calm can still function as active feeding habitat after dark. Despite being told not to enter, he removed his shirt and stepped into the water, insisting he'd grab the phone and be right back. He descended in the shallow water, where the device was still clearly visible on the sandy bottom. Everything calm for a brief moment under the dock lights above. As he started to rise, a bull shark moved in from the side and struck in a fast, direct hit. The bite caused severe injuries to the upper torso and neck, cutting major blood flow and taking away his control almost immediately. The force pushed him into a dock piling before he broke back into open water. He surfaced shortly after, but blood loss had already spread through the lit water beneath the dock. One companion immediately entered the water and reached Otis, holding him upright against the piling and trying to keep his airway above the surface while applying direct support. The water looks shallow enough that help feels possible, until you're actually in it and realize how little control you have. At the same time, another ran toward the marina office to alert staff and call emergency services, while the third remained frozen on the dock, unable to process what had happened. Things went downhill fast. Otis started slipping out of awareness as the blood loss got worse, and under the dock lights, it was clear to everyone just how bad it really was. They kept trying to hold him up and keep him steady in the water, but he wasn't responding in any real way anymore. At that point, it wasn't about fixing anything. It was just about keeping him above the surface until help got there. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and removed him from the water. CPR was initiated on the dock and continued during transport to a nearby trauma center. He remained in profound hemorrhagic shock with no return of spontaneous circulation and was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Medical findings confirmed he died from massive blood loss caused by a severed carotid artery from a single bite, with no drowning involved. Wildlife officials later reviewed the incident and noted the marina sat within a known juvenile bull shark habitat where animals frequently enter shallow basins at low light to feed. A recommendation was made to improve water safety signage and reinforce warnings about wildlife hazards and water entry risks in the basin. The recommendation was documented but not implemented. The marina was temporarily closed for review before reopening under normal operations. The event remained recorded in regional wildlife reports and became a point of discussion within the local boating community. One of the men present left his dock job shortly afterward and avoided working on the water for a long period. Over time, the story persisted locally as a reminder of how quickly routine actions in familiar environments could turn irreversible in moments where conditions were already stacked against control. That's what sticks with people who were there, how normal it all looked right up until it wasn't. And finally, it moves into controlled waters off Mexico. But even there, where everything is supposed to be managed and safe, things still break down in a matter of seconds. It was October 18th, 2016, off Guadalupe Island in Baja California, Mexico, 150 miles offshore in clear, deep blue water with visibility extending far below the surface. A surface shark cage floated beside a live-aboard vessel, while a large great white circled below in slow, controlled passes. Maren Wolf, 34, was a dental hygienist in Tucson, Arizona. She'd spent about 2 years saving for a shark cage diving trip after getting into documentaries and dive footage. At work, she was seen as quiet and steady, the kind of person who focused fully once she committed to something. She'd only recently gotten her basic diving certification and had no real open water experience beyond training dives. This was her second day on a 3-day trip, and she had already been in the cage a few times without any issues. People often build confidence quickly in environments that feel controlled, even when they're still very far from familiar. Guadalupe Island is known for seasonal great white shark activity and frequent close passes near cage diving operations. The cage was a steel frame lowered beside the vessel with an emergency side hatch intended for crew use only. Passengers were strictly instructed not to touch the hatch, which was secured by a manual release system designed for rapid opening. During the dive, a large female great white shark, identified by distinguishing dorsal fin markings, circled the cage for an extended period. She passed close along the front and sidebars in repeated arcs, sometimes slowing before turning away again into deeper water. Maren was positioned along one side of the cage, watching the shark as it moved past. At one point, she extended her hand through the bars toward it, reaching into the water outside the structure despite prior instructions given during briefing. Her hand crossed the bars just as the shark turned back in. At the same time, the emergency hatch mechanism was triggered and the side panel swung open outward from the frame. Inside the cage, another diver noticed the sudden movement and shifted position, but the change happened too quickly to intervene. The shark, which had been circling just beyond the cage, turned sharply and returned toward the structure from a wider angle rather than the front approach most divers were watching. It turned back toward the cage opening and made contact at the edge of the structure, triggering a sudden burst of movement and splashing at the surface. The cage frame shifted under the force of the impact as she lost her footing amid the turbulence. From outside, it would have just looked like sudden chaos at the surface. From inside the cage and the deck above, visibility was briefly obscured by churning water and the shark's movement against the structure. She went under and was not immediately visible again. Crew members immediately signaled for assistance and began emergency response procedures. A safety diver entered shortly after and conducted a search around the cage and down to depth, where scattered gear and a damaged weight belt were later found. Despite extended searching by support crews, no confirmed trace of her was recovered in the immediate area. A safety diver entered shortly after and conducted a search around the cage and down to approximately 70 feet, where scattered gear and a damaged weight belt were later located on the seafloor. There was no sign of the person in the immediate area. Boats and support crews continued searching for several hours, expanding the search pattern outward but no additional identifiable evidence was recovered. Authorities later classified the incident as a fatal shark encounter during a commercial diving operation with no recovered remains. Investigators reviewed procedures and confirmed the hatch had been accessed in violation of safety instructions, but the operator was cleared of negligence due to signed waivers and documented briefings. Following the incident, cage diving safety systems were reviewed across the industry, including changes to emergency access designs and increased reliance on top-controlled entry systems in some operations. The updates were described as routine safety improvements without public reference to the specific case. Marin's family was later informed that recovery efforts were exhausted. The expedition resumed after an extended suspension period and regulatory review, and the site later continued operating under revised safety protocols. The event remained recorded in maritime logs as a fatal offshore diving incident involving a large predatory shark, with remains never recovered. Looking back, what stands out is how fast layered controls can collapse at once. Not just one mistake, but timing, environment, and human behavior aligning in a way that leaves almost no room for recovery.